Okay, now I want to discuss just for a moment how music theory applies particularly to the mandolin. It's a good thing we're studying a lot of music theory in, in this course, and it's a good thing to apply music theory directly to the instrument that you're playing. In this case, it's the mandolin, and there are some unique things about the mandolin. It's got a lot in common with other stringed instruments. It's got a lot in common with other fretted instruments. One of the greatest things about the mandolin is the fact that it's tuned in fifths. And you probably heard people mention this. If not, you certainly soon will. People talk about the great thing about the mandolin being tuned in fifths, and that makes it easier to learn things and to do things and to move things around. It makes music theory easier on the mandolin. And you may wonder, well, why do they say that? Exactly why is that? You'll remember that in our last lesson, lesson 5, we studied the circle of fifths in music theory. And I have made a video in lesson 5 about the circle of fifths. Also gave copies of the circle of fifths. And I wrote a brief sort of an article called a primer, circle of fifths primer. And in that lesson, I was struck with the beauty of the interval of the fifth in music. Music is all about intervals, whether we're talking about the distance between notes or whether we're talking about time intervals in rhythm and timing. Music is all about intervals. It's very important. Timing is important. If you consider an interval a measure of time, then you know, the timing and the rhythm that you use when you play is extremely important, where you place the notes. And then as far as which notes you play, the distance between notes, the intervals between notes are important. You know, that's what makes the notes sound different, and you want to put notes together that sound good together. Well, when we're talking about intervals, as in the distance between notes, whole steps, half steps, etc., one of the most interesting intervals is the perfect fifth. And we got into that some as we studied the circle of fifths. Now, interestingly, when we look at the mandolin is tuned in fifths. You start with a G, a fifth up from G, you've got the D, a fifth up from the D, you've got the A, and a fifth up from that, you've got the E. So this is one of the cool things about the mandolin, and we're going to talk about some patterns that emerge because of that. And in particularly, I want to back up to the major scale and talk about the tetrachord. Okay, I want to introduce you now to the major tetrachord. What is a tetrachord? Tetra, of course, means four, and a chord is a series of notes. And so we're talking about four notes. Four notes make up a tetrachord, and the major tetrachord consists of notes that are separated by a whole step, and a half step. So this would be a tetrachord. That would be a tetrachord. This would be another tetrachord. What we had there is four notes with a whole step, and a half step. That would be 2 frets up, 2 frets up, 1 fret up. That's a tetrachord. This would be a tetrachord. Beginning on the B flat here, making a tetrachord. That's four notes that are separated by a whole step, a whole step, and a half step. Whole step, half step. That's what signifies a major tetrachord. Here's another one. There's another tetrachord. Okay, now why is this important? Because a major scale, we've given you a definition. Music theory at my website and in these lessons, we've talked about a definition, which is that a major scale consists of 8 notes with a half step between the 3rd and the 4th, and a half step between the 7th and the 8th, and all other notes are a whole step apart. The 8th note, of course, being an octave, a repetition of the 1st. And that could be called the 1st degree of the scale, whether it falls on the 1 or the 8. 8th is an octave. And so the definition was 8 notes with a half step between the 3rd and the 4th, and a half step between the 7th and the 8th, and all other notes are a whole step apart. If you know that definition, you can write out and puzzle out any major scale in any key with a pencil and paper. Now, we've also given another little tip that Brad gave us on how to find a major scale on the mandolin. And that tip is to memorize the intervals, or the number of frets that you put between each note. Memorize that as though it were a phone number. 221 2221. So we have these 2 different ways of finding major scales. One is a rote definition, just rote memory. You memorize that there's a half step between the 3rd and 4th and 7th and 8th, all other notes a whole step apart. The second way is by memorizing Brad's phone number trick. And now I want to tell you a third thing to help you understand a major scale, and it's beautiful on the mandolin. And that is that a major scale consists of 2 major tetrachords. And on the mandolin, they are just stacked on top of each other. So that's why when you play that G scale, you're fingering the G string exactly as you do the D string. It's a beautiful relationship because the major scale consists of 2 major tetrachords separated by a whole tone. So you've got a 2-2-1 here and a 2-2-1 here with a whole step between these 2. And that's what makes a major scale. A major scale, 2 tetrachords separated by a whole tone. So on the mandolin, whenever you play that B scale, you come down here and follow it exactly the same way. The tetrachord forms an interval of a perfect 4th. 1, 2, 3, 4. To go back to the B scale, this is a perfect 4th. That's the 4th degree from the root. And so next, you have a half step, and from the perfect 4th, a whole step. Excuse me, from the perfect 4th, a whole step will bring you to the perfect 5th. Now, because the mandolin is tuned in fifths, the perfect 5th will always lie directly below the 1. And you move on up to the perfect octave. Okay, I'm going to wrap this video up now. It's over 10 minutes. The main thing that I wanted to do here was to introduce the idea of the major tetrachord. And this can be an important concept in music theory. You don't have to know this stuff, but you can certainly learn a lot by studying a little bit about tetrachords. And I'm going to put a link on the lesson page that will take you to a great article, easy to understand, about tetrachords, where you can look up more information about that. But our main goal is to learn our way around on the mandolin and be able to fairly easily find, from any note, we can find the fifth or we can find the third of any scale. And those are the notes that make up the major chord. If we know major chords and if we know major scales, then we can easily find the minor chords and the minor scales. And so that will be covered coming up in the next few videos.